On October 26, 1825, New York Governor DeWitt Clinton stood at the edge of New York Harbor and poured a keg of water into the sea. It was lake water, Lake Erie water to be specific, carried from Buffalo in a ceremonial keg over the course of 9 days and 363 miles, along a ribbon of water that had taken 8 years and $7 million to dig through the wilderness of upstate New York. The ritual had a name, the Wedding of the Waters. The idea was that the waters of the Great Lakes were being married formally and permanently to the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. It was, even by the standards of an era that loved a good ceremony, a little much, but DeWitt Clinton had earned his moment. The Erie Canal was, at the time of its completion, the greatest feat of civil engineering in American history. 363 miles long, 40 feet wide. It climbed 83 locks to cross the Appalachian Divide and then descended again to sea level, connecting Buffalo on Lake Erie to Albany on the Hudson River, and from there to New York City and the rest of the world. It had been called Clinton's Folly when he proposed it. It had been called Clinton's Ditch while it was being built. Now, it was called the eighth wonder of the world, and the men who had called it a folly were very quiet about having done so. When they read about the Erie Canal in the papers, every ambitious man in America looked at the nearest river, the nearest valley, the nearest stretch of low ground between two bodies of water and started doing the math. What if they dug their own ditches? With shovels and diggers and willpower and ingenuity, men could reshape the flow of a continent. They could mark the earth in their own image. They could make an awful lot of money. The nation was stricken with Canal Fever. It was contagious. It spread. And soon enough, it arrived in South Bend. Hello and welcome to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. I'm your host, Aaron Helman. And during this series, we're exploring the earliest years of South Bend, long before it was incorporated as a city, long before the Civil War, back in the earliest years when it was just a few pioneers scratching out a living. During the course of this episode, you'll hear fictional advertisements for very real historical companies and products. We do that to help break up the podcast, provide some levity, to include just a little more history than we could otherwise, and to give you a sense of the time and place when and where all of this is happening. The absence of actual paid advertisements is made possible by the generosity of our donors and sponsors. And now, with all that out of the way, let's go to upstate New York, where the world has just been changed by men with shovels and money and a complete willingness to ignore their doubters. Before the Erie Canal opened, it cost $100 to ship a ton of goods from Buffalo to New York City. After the canal opened, it cost $4. Before the canal, the journey took 3 weeks. After the canal, it took 8 days. Farms in Ohio and Indiana that had been far from the East Coast found themselves suddenly connected to the largest city in America by a continuous water highway. New York had already been important. It was about to seize a dominance that it would never relinquish. As for the Midwest states of Ohio and Indiana and Illinois and Michigan, suddenly, they were no longer so remote. The Erie Canal did not just move goods. It moved people. It moved money. It moved ambition. Within a few years of its opening, 1 in 8 people moving to the western frontier was using the Erie Canal to get there. Towns that had been trading posts became cities. Places that had been nothing became towns. Cleveland went from a frontier village to a Great Lakes port in a generation. Every state saw what happened to New York. Every state wanted the same thing for itself. Ohio's governor called the canals the veins and arteries of the body politic and immediately commissioned 2 canals of his own. Pennsylvania built nearly 1,000 miles of them. Indiana, not to be outdone, passed the Internal Improvements Act of 1836, committing to build canals, railroads, and turnpikes simultaneously across the entire state. It was the most ambitious infrastructure plan in Indiana history. It was also completely insane, a plan so vast and so expensive that it would eventually push the state to the edge of bankruptcy. But in 1836, nobody was thinking about that. By 1837, there were 1,000 laborers digging canal projects across Indiana. The money was flowing. Canal Fever was real. If canals were the logs on the fire, then America's money supply was the gasoline that got tossed on top of it. Between 1834 and 1836, the American money supply grew by 30% every single year. Land that had been worth $10 an acre was being talked up to $25. Investors were borrowing against assets they didn't fully own to buy land they couldn't fully afford because the prices kept going up and there was no reason to think they would stop. Into all of this stepped Alexis Coquillard, who had his own problems. The fur trade was dead. Not dying. Dead. John Jacob Astor, the man whose American Fur Company had employed Coquillard and sent him to the bend in the St. Joseph River in the first place, had sold the company in 1834. The beaver hat had given way to the silk hat. The portage that had made South Bend's location valuable was becoming a historical curiosity. The world that had given Coquillard his start had moved on without him. But Coquillard had not been idle. He had spent the years since the fur trade's decline building mills, buying land, and helping Father Sorin establish a small Catholic university on a pond north of town. He was a man of standing, ambition, and considerable real estate holdings. He was not the kind of man who was content to merely watch the world change around him. And in the mid-1830s, the world was changing very loudly. You could hear it in Ben Coquillard's tavern on any given evening, when men sat around tables with newspapers and opinions and not enough whiskey to slow them down. The canal projects, the land prices, the fortunes being made by men who had simply been willing to dig a ditch in the right place. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone was doing the math. Alexis Coquillard was convinced. He started planning a ditch of his own.
Build your mill on the brand new Kankakee Mill Race and let the water do the work for you. The race is being dug now by Alexis Coquillard, and the best addresses on the city will sit on its frontage. Don't get stuck in the old downtown when the new one comes to life. Buy your plot today! And now back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
Coquillard wasn't exactly trying to build a canal. He wasn't trying to move boats or passengers or freight from one place to another the way the Erie Canal did. Projects like those ran for hundreds of miles through the wilderness, employed thousands of workers at a time, cost millions of dollars, and took decades to complete. By comparison, what Coquillard had in mind was almost modest. What Coquillard wanted to build was a mill race. A mill race is a channel, a man-made ditch, really, designed to divert water from one place to another so that the moving water can turn a wheel, and the turning wheel can power a mill, and the powered mill can do the work of 100 men. This was not a new idea, and it was not an unproven one. Mills had been running on diverted water since before anyone alive could remember. What was new in the 1830s was the scale at which men were doing it. In Lowell, Massachusetts, a group of investors took the falls of the Merrimack River, channeled them through a system of canals and races, then built their city around it. By 1836, 20 textile mills in Lowell were producing 50 million yards of cloth every year, employing 8,000 people, powered entirely by falling water. Lowell had started as a farming village. It became, in a single generation, the largest industrial city in America. In Rochester, New York, men had done the same thing with the falls of the Genesee River. They had challenged the water through races, built mills along those races, and turned a frontier settlement into the largest flour-producing city in the United States. Rochester's population had gone from 331 people in 1815 to more than 12,000 by 1834. It had taken less than 20 years. Water powered the world the same way that electricity and fossil fuels would power the world in the years to come. The wealthiest men were the ones shrewd enough to control that power. The model was clear. Find a water source, dig a race, build mills along the race, watch the town grow up around the mills. It worked in Massachusetts. It worked in New York. It was working in Ohio and everywhere else that men were willing to put a shovel in the ground. There was no reason it shouldn't work in South Bend. Alexis Coquillard came here in the first place to exploit the portage, the space between the St. Joseph and Kankakee rivers. It made a good spot for a trading post. Now, he was looking at a different way to exploit the space between the rivers, by digging a ditch that would force one of them to flow into the other. It was a little less than 4 miles, give or take. People all over the country were digging ditches wildly more ambitious than that and finding success in it. Coquillard expected nothing different. He would harness the current, create an almost unlimited source of hydropower, and build mills along the race that would make South Bend into an unrivaled industrial center. The Free Press, in January of 1837, called the planned Kankakee mill race equal, if not superior, to any establishment west of Rochester, New York. 3 different mill sites were already being planned along the canal route. Lots along the projected race were already being sold. People were buying in before a shovel had touched the ground. There were already conversations that downtown South Bend would relocate itself to the race just as soon as the water was flowing. It's a little bit of a racket if you think about it. Coquillard had bought half of the land that became South Bend. He subdivided it and sold it off at a profit. Now that everyone was moved in, he was buying up new land and building the infrastructure that would move the town from the place he'd originally put it. They'd have to buy from him all over again. But at least, when the race was opened, they would all become wildly rich. Alexis Coquillard had a foolproof plan. He had the capital. He had wealthy backers alongside and behind him. The founder of South Bend had been here less than 20 years, but he was about to reinvent the city for at least the second time. In the spring of 1837, the men with shovels arrived. They started to dig.
Bacon has come to South Bend. That's right, hot, salty, sizzly bacon. And it's only at William Hammond's provision store, where bacon is arriving by the wagon load. The price will be reasonable, and your breakfast will never be the same again. And now back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
The men dug southwest from the St. Joseph River, cutting through the Turner Hall grounds on North Michigan Street, then west along what would become Navarre Street, then southwest through the city cemetery, then west through the low ground toward the Kankakee. 4 miles of ditch. Bridges were built to span it. The work was hard and the ground was soft, loose, and sandy with a large portion of muck, but the men kept digging because the men paying them were convinced it would work, and the newspapers were convinced it would work, and everyone who had bought lots along the projected race was convinced it would work. And then they finished their digging. The water did not flow. The plans had been miscalculated. Alexis Coquillard had just dug a canal across the Continental Divide. The water would not flow from one river into another. Coquillard threw even more money at the project, but it was fruitless. They built a cofferdam designed to redirect the flow, to force the water to go where the engineer had originally intended it to go. It didn't work, but it did cost a lot of money. There wasn't even a trickle of water from one river that moved into the other. The loose soil that made up the floor of the race simply absorbed it all, then sent it back into the water table, back toward where it had come from. Without knowing it, Coquillard had built a ditch in a sponge and expected it to carry water. After much heartbreaking work and an investment approaching his entire fortune, Coquillard realized it was a disaster. The total loss was approximately $100,000. a staggering sum in 1837 in a town where a county courthouse had been built for $6,000. To finance the project, Coquillard had mortgaged to the state bank enormous holdings of land in the amount of $45,639.85. He lost all of it. The bank divided the land and listed the plots at bargain prices, eager to recoup whatever it could. The West Washington Street corridor, the neighborhood that would eventually become one of the most desirable addresses in the city, was born from Coquillard's foreclosure. A man named Joseph Bartlett was the first to seize the opportunity, buying the lot at 720 West Washington and building the first house on what once had been Coquillard's land. Later, the Oliver family would build Copshaholm there. The Studebaker family would build Tippecanoe Place. The grandest houses in South Bend's history rose from the ruins of Coquillard's Folly on land that had been his, sold at a discount because he had run out of options. Of the race, almost nothing remains. There are a few streets in South Bend that cut odd angles through the city, relics of a ditch that ran dry and wasn't filled back in for decades after the mill race failed. There's also a bridge in the city cemetery. It was supposed to span the race. The race never ran, but the bridge remains. You should check it out sometime. It's the only collection of stones in the graveyard with nothing interesting underneath it. Hey, thanks for joining us on A Bend in Time presented by the History Museum in South Bend. There's more history waiting for you at historymuseumsb.org. I'm your host, Aaron Helman. The theme music is Whose Distance Is It Anyway by Neil Carmichael. In our next episode, we're telling the story of the Potawatomi Trail of Death and the complicated role that South Bend's own founder played in it. Until then, keep learning new things, and remember, everything is fascinating as long as you stay curious.